In criminal psychology, we define a serial killer as someone who murders at least two people in separate events occurring at different times. While the legal system doesn't classify serial murder as a formal category, these cases have captivated public attention and media coverage, especially those involving multiple victims or particularly disturbing methods. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that behind every case are real victims whose lives were cut tragically short. This presentation approaches these cases with respect for those lost and a commitment to education rather than sensationalism. Case 1. Jack the Ripper. The Phantom of Whitechapel. The year is 1888. Queen Victoria sits on the British throne. In London's impoverished Whitechapel district, a shadow moves through narrow, fog-shrouded streets. Within 3 months, 5 women, all struggling to survive through prostitution, would meet a horrific end. The first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was discovered on August 31st, with her throat deeply cut and abdominal mutilations. Within days, Annie Chapman was found in a similar state. By September 30th, 2 more women, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, were killed on the same night. The final confirmed victim, Mary Jane Kelly, suffered the most extensive mutilations in her own home on November. What made these crimes particularly chilling was the surgical precision evident in the wounds. Investigators noted that the killer appeared to have anatomical knowledge, leading to theories that he might be a surgeon, butcher, or someone with professional knowledge of human anatomy. But perhaps most unsettling was the killer's communication with authorities. In letters signed Jack the Ripper, the murderer taunted police and predicted future killings. One letter, known as the From Hell letter, was even accompanied by a portion of a victim's preserved kidney. Despite one of history's most extensive manhunts, Jack the Ripper was never identified. Suspects have ranged from surgeons to royalty, artists to butchers. The case remains unsolved to this day, becoming the template for the modern serial killer investigation. What do you think allowed this killer to evade capture in an era before forensic science? And how might modern investigative techniques have changed the outcome? Case 2. Holmes, the Torture Castle. As America prepared for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a pharmacist named Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, was preparing something far more sinister. Holmes constructed a 3-story building, later nicknamed the Murder Castle, perhaps history's most deliberately designed killing ground. What appeared to be a hotel and pharmacy concealed a labyrinth of horrors, secret passages, soundproofed rooms, hidden gas lines to render victims unconscious, trapdoors, chutes leading to the basement, and a crematorium disguised as a furnace. Using his charm and position as a business owner, Holmes lured victims, many of them young women arriving in Chicago for the World's Fair, to his establishment. Once inside, they entered his architectural nightmare. Holmes would often gas his victims unconscious before moving them to his surgical rooms, where he would conduct horrific experiments and mutilations. The disposal method was equally calculated. Bodies were stripped of flesh, with skeletons sold to medical schools for profit. Holmes also ran elaborate insurance scams, taking out policies on employees or business associates before murdering them. His downfall came not from murder but from a financial dispute with a fellow scammer named Marion Hedgepeth. When Holmes failed to pay Hedgepeth his promised share of an insurance scheme, Hedgepeth informed police about Holmes's suspicious activities. In 1894, Holmes was arrested. Police discovered the horror of his murder castle, and he eventually confessed to 27 murders, though historians believe the actual number could range from 20. Holmes was hanged in 1896, reportedly requesting his coffin be encased in cement to prevent grave robbers from stealing his body for dissection, an ironic concern given his own practices. Holmes represents an organized, calculated killer who created an infrastructure for murder. Looking at his case, what warning signs might have been visible to those around him? How did the excitement and chaos of the World's Fair provide cover for his activities? Case 3. Pedro López, the Monster of the Andes. Some serial killers achieve infamy through media cover. Others, despite staggering victim counts, remain relatively unknown to the public. Pedro López falls into the latter category, despite potentially being one of history's most prolific murderers. Born in Colombia to a prostitute mother, López's childhood was marked by extreme abuse. By age 8, he was ejected from his home and survived on the streets, where he endured further abuse. Psychological experts point to this traumatic childhood as potentially formative in his later crimes, though nothing can excuse the horror he would inflict. In the 1970s, López began a murder spree across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, primarily targeting young girls from indigenous tribes. These marginalized communities, often overlooked by authorities, made his victims particularly vulnerable. The remoteness of these areas and the lack of communication infrastructure allowed his crimes to continue undetected for years. López's arrest in 1980 came almost by accident. He was nearly killed by tribal leaders when attempting to abduct a young girl. Police intervention saved his life, but led to the discovery of his crimes. In a shocking revelation, López led authorities to the graves of 53 young girls in Ecuador. His confessions grew more horrifying: 110 victims in Ecuador, 100 in Colombia, and over 100 in Peru, totaling more than 300 murders. Investigators deemed the confessions credible based on his detailed knowledge of the burial sites. Most disturbing of all is the conclusion to this case. Despite being convicted of murdering over 100 children, López served only 14 years in an Ecuadorian prison before being deported to Colombia, where he was briefly held in a psychiatric hospital and declared sane. He was released in 1998 on just $50. His current whereabouts remain unknown. There is a possibility that one of history's most prolific killers walks free to this day. This case raises profound questions about justice systems, the protection of vulnerable populations, and international cooperation in tracking dangerous criminals. Why do you think some cases receive enormous media attention while others, even those with higher victim counts, remain relatively obscure? Case 4: Ted Bundy, America's notorious charmer. Few names in criminal history evoke the chilling combination of charm and savagery quite like Ted Bundy. His case transformed America's understanding of what a serial killer could look like. Handsome, articulate, and educated, Bundy shattered the stereotype of the social outcast. He studied psychology and law, worked for a suicide prevention hotline, and was active in Republican politics. This carefully constructed facade concealed a predator responsible for at least 30 murders across 7 states from 1974 to 1978. Bundy's methodology evolved but centered on exploiting trust. Early attacks involved breaking into homes to assault sleeping women. Later, he refined his approach, often feigning injury or impersonating authority figures to gain his victims' trust. Many of his victims were college-aged women with similar physical characteristics: young, attractive, with long dark hair parted in the middle. His first arrest came in Utah in 1975 on suspicion of burglary. Evidence connecting him to multiple disappearances mounted, leading to murder charges in Colorado. During pretrial hearings, Bundy, who insisted on representing himself, escaped by jumping from a courthouse library window. Recaptured after 6 days, he escaped again in December 1977, this time remaining free for nearly 2 months. During this final period of freedom, Bundy committed some of his most brutal crimes at Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house, attacking 4 women and killing 2 in a single night. His final victim was 12-year-old Kimberly Lee. Bundy's 1979 Miami trial marked a turning point in American media. As the first nationally televised murder trial, it transformed criminal proceedings into public entertainment. Bundy, acting as his own attorney, used the courtroom as a stage for his performative personality, even proposing to a character witness during proceedings. After conviction and during the decade he spent on death row, Bundy gave numerous interviews, including conversations with FBI profiler Robert Ressler, that helped develop criminal psychology. In the days before his 1989 execution, Bundy confessed to dozens of murders, though many cases remain unresolved. Bundy's case fundamentally changed how Americans viewed serial killers and led to important advances in criminal profiling. What lessons can we take from how his charm and social standing allowed him to avoid suspicion? How might understanding his methodology help in preventing similar crime? Case 5: John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. Behind the makeup of Pogo the Clown lurked one of America's most prolific serial killers. John Wayne Gacy, a respected Chicago businessman who performed at children's hospitals and charitable events, murdered at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1990. He owned a successful construction company, was active in local politics, and was known for hosting neighborhood barbecues. This community standing provided cover for his predatory behavior and helped dismiss early suspicion. His methodology followed a pattern. Gacy would lure young men and teenage boys to his home by offering construction work, alcohol, or simply a place to hang out. Once there, he would overpower them, usually through handcuffs as part of a magic trick. The victims would then be sexually assaulted, tortured, and ultimately murdered, most by strangulation with a tourniquet. For years, Gacy escaped detection, burying 26 victims in the crawl space beneath his house. Others were disposed of in the nearby Des Plaines River when the crawl space became too full. The investigation that finally uncovered his crimes began with the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert P. Unlike previous cases where families of missing boys had pointed to Gacy, this time authorities took the connection seriously. A search warrant revealed evidence in Gacy's car, and upon entering his home, investigators immediately noticed the smell of decomposition. The excavation of Gacy's property revealed a horror scene, bodies in various states of decay packed into the small crawl space. Gacy's trial began on February 6, 1980. Despite his attempt at an insanity defense, claiming an alternate personality committed the murders, the jury found him guilty. He received multiple death sentences and was executed by lethal injection on May 10. In prison, Gacy developed a new persona as an artist, with his clown paintings becoming macabre collector's items, raising ethical questions about commercializing artifacts from serial killers. Gacy's case highlights how predators can hide behind respected community positions. What responsibility do communities have to investigate allegations against prominent members? How might current safeguarding practices have identified Gacy's behavior early? Case 6: Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer's case stands out for both the extreme nature of his crimes and the profound failures of the justice system that allowed them to continue. Dahmer's killing began in 1978, when, at just 18 years old, he murdered hitchhiker Stephen Hicks. After a dormant period during military service from which he was discharged for alcoholism, Dahmer's killings accelerated in the late 1980s, primarily targeting gay men of color in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His methodology involved luring victims to his apartment with promises of money, sex, or companionship. Once there, he would drug them, strangle them, and perform disturbing post-mortem acts including dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism. Dahmer later confessed to preserving body parts and consuming portions of his victims in an attempt to make them a permanent part of him. Perhaps most disturbing were the missed opportunities to stop Dahmer. In May 1991, 14-year-old Konorak Synthesophone escaped Dahmer's apartment, disoriented and injured. When neighbors called police, Dahmer convinced the responding officers that Synthesophone was his adult boyfriend, having an alcohol-related dispute. The officers returned the boy to Dahmer's apartment, where he was murdered shortly thereafter. Records later revealed that one of these same officers had previously arrested Dahmer for molesting Synthesophone's older brother. Dahmer's capture finally came in July 1991, when Tracy Edwards escaped from the apartment and flagged down police. Inside, officers discovered photographic evidence of dismemberment and body parts preserved in acid. The investigation revealed 17 victims during his 1992 trial. Despite pleading guilty by reason of insanity, Dahmer was found legally sane and responsible for his actions. He received 15 life sentences but served only 2 years before being beaten to death by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver. Dahmer's case raises important questions about racial disparities in policing, as complaints from Milwaukee's communities of color about Dahmer's behavior were repeatedly ignored. What systemic failures allowed Dahmer's killing spree to continue? How might unconscious bias have influenced how authorities responded to concerns from his predominantly minority victims' communities? Case 7: Harold Shipman, the Doctor of Death. Not all serial killers fit the profile of social outcasts or violent predators. Harold Shipman, Britain's most prolific murderer, weaponized his respected position as a family physician to kill an estimated 250 patients over 23 years. After qualifying as a doctor in 1970, Shipman began practicing in northern England. Unlike many serial killers who select vulnerable strangers, Shipman's victims were his own patients, primarily elderly women who trusted him implicitly. His methodology was clinical and calculated,
home visits where he would administer lethal overdoses of diamorphine medical heroin, then falsify medical records to show a history of poor health. The sheer scale of his killing went undetected for decades, due to his professional standing and careful victim selection. Elderly patients dying under a doctor's care rarely triggered suspicion. Shipman even cultivated a reputation as a dedicated physician willing to make house calls, increasing both his access to vulnerable victims and his community standing. The first investigation into Shipman in 1990, despite the concerns of a local undertaker about the high number of cremation certificates Shipman had signed, police failed to check death records properly or consult medical experts. The cursory investigation found no cause for concern, allowing Shipman to kill 3 more patients before his eventual capture. His downfall came through greed and overconfidence. When 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy was found dead in 1998, her daughter, a lawyer, became suspicious of a crudely forged will naming Shipman as the sole beneficiary. This prompted a proper investigation, including exhumations that revealed diamorphine poisoning. Shipman was convicted in 2000 of 15 murders, though a subsequent public inquiry concluded he had killed at least 215 patients, with 250 being a more likely estimate. He never admitted his crimes and committed suicide in prison in 2004, denying families the closure of knowing why their loved ones were targeted. The Shipman case led to fundamental reforms in British medical practice, including stricter controls on opiates, changes to death certification, and enhanced monitoring of mortality rates associated with individual doctors. Shipman's case demonstrates how trusted positions can provide cover for predatory behavior. What safeguards should exist when we place such trust in authority figures? How can systems be designed to detect statistical anomalies without creating undue suspicion of innocent professionals? The cases we've examined today represent some of the darkest chapters in criminal history. By studying them, we gain not just knowledge of historical events, but insights into criminal psychology, investigative procedures, and the evolution of forensic science. These cases have collectively shaped how law enforcement approaches serial murder investigations. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, now the Behavioral Analysis Unit, developed many of its profiling techniques through studying these very criminal DNA databases, enhanced communication between jurisdictions, and improved victim identification methods, all emerged partly in response to these cases. From a psychological perspective, these cases also reveal common factors often present in serial offenders: childhood trauma, fascination with cruelty, desire for control, and an ability to compartmentalize their crimes from their public persona. For society, these cases remind us to balance healthy trust with appropriate skepticism, to take reports from marginalized communities seriously, and to recognize that predators often deliberately cultivate respected positions to facilitate their crime. I'd like to hear your thoughts on these cases. Which aspects of criminal psychology do you find most significant? Are there particular preventative measures you believe might help identify such offenders earlier? Share your perspectives in the comments section below. If you found this educational exploration valuable, please consider supporting the channel by subscribing and turning on notifications. Each week we examine different aspects of criminal psychology, historical cases, and modern forensic techniques, always with a focus on education rather than sensationalism. Thank you for joining this examination of history's darkest chapter. By understanding the patterns of the past, we work toward a safer future.